Welcome to Powered by Podio. Automation is everything. Supercharge your business with Podio. Get ready for another episode of Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming, your weekly dive into the awesome impact workflow and automation can have on your business when it's powered by Podio. Join us each week as we learn from the top Podio partners in the world, as we investigate system integrations and add-ons, and hear from real business owners who have implemented Podio into their business. Now, join your host Jordan Samuel Fleming, CEO of Game Changers, for this week's episode.
Hey everybody, it's Jordan Samuel Fleming, Chairman, not CEO anymore. That honor has gone to my great friend Andrew Cranston, but Chairman of Game Changers and host of Supercharged. This week I am fantastically glad to be joined by a returning champion, Justin Ellis from Wolfnest Property Management. Now, you'll see Justin on the podcast a couple times, and one of the reasons is they've got such an involved, large system that we've been working with them on for years and years and years. And this podcast really focuses, now that it's up, running, and they're using it in their business, it looks at some of the key property management processes that every property management company has to go through, and how the new Podio ecosystem has really engaged with the company, has done a massive job at distilling everything into one system and saved an enormous amount of time. It's a really fun conversation around the actual kind of where the rubber meets the road of how a good Podio system and how a flexible Podio system can come into a very process-based business and really change the game for the business in every little way. Fun conversation with Justin, it always is, and it's great to listen to the different kind of impacts that maybe weren't always as expected as some of the others. You know, we design systems sometimes thinking, well, it's going to do this and it's going to have an impact here, and there are always these sort of collateral impacts that we get as well, and it's really fun to hear about them. Of course, Justin also, as a smartphone customer compared to his Ring Central account, he's saving a lot of money and it's fully integrated to his CRM, and we talk a bit about that. But really, if you're in property management or if your business is heavily process driven, this is a really great episode to find out a bit about the awesome impact Podio can really have when you start to run those processes and have the system drive these things and bring data together. So have a listen to Justin and I catching back up on how his new system is really, really, really taking hold in the company. Let's have a listen. And all right, so you're a returning champion to the podcast. You're a returning champion. So in terms of where we are now, you're in your system. You're using your system. You're getting things moving. What is the next? Like our discussion now, I wanted to focus on a couple things, maybe processes that you're heavy into on property management, and how your new Podio system is affecting them. What sort of insights can you give us?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, as far as where we're at, we are officially using the system. We have transitioned over a majority of our operations to it. There's still a few kind of smaller pieces that we're still rolling out, but by and large, our main operations are running inside the system. And so we are incredibly excited about that. And the efficiencies that we've gained in kind of converting from what we were doing, which was kind of, multiple different platforms kind of piecemealed together so that we could kind of have a cohesive process. And now over to Podio, where everything just kind of flows. I mean, we're gaining, lots of employee times being saved. Tasks are basically getting completed from a management perspective. We're able to make sure that things were done and boxes were checked. So it's been a fantastic process so far. And honestly, I think one of them that just kind of jumps out to me off the top of my head is the rental application process. So essentially from the time when someone submits an application until when they're fully into the system and a tenant. That's probably been one of the biggest ones.
So rental application, someone wants to move into one of your properties. Now, my understanding of the property management market, sort of industry, the workflows are relatively advanced compared to anyone who's not in the industry, but it's nothing compared to yours. But that is there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of things that happen. What were you doing before, and what is the real change as it is now? Because I think that's a good example of a real life, because that is a process every property management company is going to do, and they're probably all going to hate.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you actually nailed it on the head by saying there's just a lot of steps to it. And what we were doing before is all of those steps were wrapped up in different systems, different softwares, things like that. So just to kind of give you an example, before a prospective tenant would basically go to our website, they could find the available listings there. We use something called Show Mojo. So that would essentially kind of handle the showing process. Now, we still use Show Mojo, but once they get to the point where they are submitting a rental application, they would go to our website, they would do that online. So a lot of the management softwares have a native rental application workflow in there. We weren't using it for cost reasons, so we had a separate third-party company. So they would submit their application, that would come in. We would then have to take that information and put it manually into PropertyWare. And then we could kind of get the actual workflow started in there. Then we were essentially using a combination of different kind of CRM systems to do the automated follow-up on that person if they weren't kind of moving to the next step in the process. But basically it was all managed, very manually, very labor intensive. Sure, we had email templates and things like that, but by and large, they were having to kind of craft large sections of each one of those emails before they could send it out. So that process was happening. Then at the time we're ready to send the lease, we were using DocuSign for that. Solid process, works well, but that would go out. We would get that signed. It would come back in. We would then have to create a ticket inside our system to send over to accounting to kind of do all of the processing. We would have to create another ticket that would go to a different team that would kind of process the move-in as far as making sure the property was ready and all of our, I's were dotted and T's were crossed. And that whole process, as you can see, that's multiple different teams. Part of that is because we are departmentalized rather than a portfolio structure. But you had a lot of different moving pieces in a lot of different areas, and they were all controlled by a human being, right? Human beings make mistakes. They could say, oops, I forgot to send that over, or, there's just too many areas where something could slip through the cracks. And so now what we have is we use that same application portal where they essentially come in, but the difference is now the email actually gets scraped and it actually puts it directly into Podio. And once it's in the Podio app, we can simply select a status for what's going on. It sends out the correct information at the correct time. Once they have provided all the information, then we send the payment information for them to submit the actual security deposit. Then once that's done, we go through the approval process, which creates a lot of tasks for my team to perform. But again, all of it's managed in one place. We can see basically, where each and every application is at. The minute one application gets approved, it automatically basically notifies all the other applicants that property is no longer available. That was a highly manual process for my team before. And once we have that approved applicant, then the system automatically generates a right signature document, which is very similar to the actual DocuSign lease that goes out. It sends it out. The moment that document is signed, the system automatically creates items in apps for accounting and for move-in. And then based on various tasks getting completed, it will move through those stages automatically. So now my team doesn't have to manage the workflow, right? They just perform the tasks. The system manages the workflow and pushes everything on to the next area. So as far as efficiency gained, we have saved hours and hours of labor just in that one process alone by kind of streamlining it.
Well, and in your busy period, because I remember almost every property management company I know has a busy period. And some of them have different busy periods than others. Heavy university towns or college towns will have certain busy periods versus others maybe. But when you guys go to a massive busy period, which I know you guys do, then you might ballpark. how many applications would you have to process when the shit hits the fan and you guys are cooking with gas? Out of curiosity.
Absolutely. So we're actually in that season now, right? For us, that is always spring and summer.
So I'm blessed to have you here because you're
exactly. That's the time when everybody wants to move. And so because of that, we do kind of structure our leases to end in that window. Well, that creates high volume during a very short period of time. So we may have 100 properties on the market and we may be getting 30 to 60 rental applications a day that are basically coming in on those. And so before, we had a team, our leasing manager and 2 full-time VAs who would basically be processing those rental applications before. Now, with them automatically importing in and basically click for all the next steps to go out, we're probably saving about 45 minutes of processing time per rental application that comes in. And now we've got one person handling it, and they've also taken on additional responsibilities because they just simply, it's not taking up their full calendar of time.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's nuts. That's unbelievable. And and you mentioned, part of the property management process that from when I've been involved with it, and I've been involved relatively, with relative depth, is the processes are almost always hurry up and wait processes, where it's never a linear process. Not many businesses just have an easy linear fucking process that just doesn't interrupt and goes from A to Z and no problems. But property management seems to be one which is acutely affected by processes that get to points and then pause because something like a tenant needs to give a deposit, or the deposit needs to be paid, or the landlord needs to do this, or and this is a really disjointed kind of process. Where you are, how have you had to balance automation with manual process in a system? Because you can't 100% automate things. You can't.
You're right. And to be perfectly honest, nor would you want to automate every single thing you do. You definitely want to automate as much as you can, but there is a certain moment where a personal touch can make a huge difference in a process. So to kind of answer your question, me personally, the big thing on it is pretty much every process does run fairly linear as far as, step 1, step 2, step 3. But where you have a lot of issues is, you're right, there are a lot of touch points where a manual person needs to step in. Did this person meet your rental application criteria? Yes or no? And a lot of those types of situations create variables. So say, for example, on that issue right there, right? You have a person who applies, and maybe they're declined, or maybe they are approved, but they have a credit issue. Maybe they have a different issue. Maybe it's a kind of financial issue. And so we would remedy these situations in different ways, right? So for example, use case number 1, if maybe it's a credit issue, we would usually look to add a cosigner as well. If it is a money issue, we would usually look to do a larger security deposit. And so in these situations, Podio has allowed us to basically do a one-click to account for each one of those variables. They come in, they get to a certain stage. Do they go down path A? Do they go down path B? And so one of the things my team's done a really good job of over the last couple of years is identifying what those variables are and what should happen in that situation, so that when each application reaches that point, you just send them down the right path.
Nice. That's a really interesting process, and one, particularly when you're talking about the scale of 100 properties with 30 applications coming in a day, not just on that property maybe, but when you're talking about that many applications, the volume that you guys have to deal with is insane. And I guess, just out of curiosity, for that process in particular, what would you say? Would it be the workflow automation that Podio is doing, or the fact that everything's in one system? Which is or is that basically like which kid you love best?
That's like asking me to pick my favorite child, right?
Yeah, okay.
It just doesn't work that way. Each one of them is a beautiful part of it. I mean, the ability to automate things and, seamlessly move it from one stage to the next is extremely important. But I think what almost is equally as important, if not more, is the fact that my team doesn't have to bounce around. We don't have to do one thing over here. Before it was just an endless series of workarounds, right? Oh, we've got to do this, but this system has this limitation, so we've got to make this adjustment. And I felt like half of our workflow was compensating for the fact that, systems didn't talk to each other, or, certain softwares had kind of various limitations. And so I don't think I can pick a favorite between the two. I think, when kind of paired up together, that's what makes the whole thing hum.
Stop! Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to interrupt this amazing podcast for a couple of seconds. I know if you're a regular listener, you have heard me talk about the Game Changers Supercharged Masterclass series, and I've already had a number of people give their details in with the forum and contact me saying, when can we get involved? Well, life has happened, moving house, lots of things going on, and although I promised to get up the first modules in June, it is going to be the end of July now, July 2021, but I am super excited about it. This absolutely free masterclass series is going to go through a bunch of great modules. The fundamentals of Podio, the fundamentals of great Podio design, great ways of using GlobiFlow and extending Podio. It is distillation of years and years of my team, myself included, of designing Podio. It's our attempt at bringing together some best-in-class principles of Podio design. It's a really exciting proposition. I can't wait to launch it. It is coming soon. Go over to www.wearegamechangers.com. Go to the masterclass, send in your details. We'll let you know as soon as the first modules are up. I guarantee the first modules are going up end of July 2021. Now, back to this awesome podcast. No, that is very, very, very fair. Okay, you said you had another one, or you had another element that was interesting. What's another pain point?
Honestly, I think the sales process has been another one that's pretty solid for us. Prior to this, we had a CRM system, right? This is where we'd capture the leads, and this is where we would run them down their various funnels until they were basically ready to sign up. At the time they were ready to sign up, we would basically move them over to our onboarding team, who would then send out via contracts, via DocuSign again, which again, manual process, different system. Once those contracts would come back, then we would send another kind of questionnaire out via DocuSign, where we would get information about the property. We would get information about the unit and HOA if there is one, just kind of all the information that we need to basically do our job. Then at that point, we would schedule a technician to kind of go by the property and do what we call a rent-ready assessment, just kind of determine what the needs look like for that property. Is it occupied? Is it vacant? Which kind of path does it basically go down there? And so that process worked. Fortunately, the sales side wasn't too high a volume. We were at, maybe 10 to I would say maybe 20 units a month would come in. So definitely not as high as the other one. But the problem that we ended up with is that process just wasn't smooth. It involved a lot of different people, and it just didn't work. Now what we have is the sales process kind of goes through very similarly, but it is done inside Podio with the same concept of, stages. Oh, this person's at this point, this person's at that point. But then the minute we get to onboarding, we're doing everything via web forms, right? So we send out the web form, we get all of their questions answered. That information automatically comes straight into our system. We're not having to pull it out of DocuSign and basically manually put it in there. And the way that we designed it inside Podio, there's a property and then there's a unit, right? So they fill out the property questionnaire that has a lot of information about, the building specifically, the grounds of it, sprinklers, that kind of stuff. And then we go to a unit questionnaire that actually has the specifics about the rentable space, the square footage, bed, bath, the actual property, things that people use in there, the stove, the fridge, all of that. So that information all kind of comes in now. No one's having to manually enter anything. happening, and the triggers are all done by what someone else is doing now. So before, the owner would fill out their DocuSign packet information, send it over to us. We would then have to, okay, great, let's put it in the system. Well, now the minute they do that, it's already in the system, and the system knows to move it to the next stage. So no one's having to look at it. It's just flowing. And so it just helps speed things up. The process works a lot faster than it did before. And I think we're collecting information better, probably better information. And there's no accuracy issues as far as, someone manually putting information into a system versus the text just basically copying over.
Has there been any, just out of curiosity, has there been any pushback at all from the end user that they don't, because obviously, I guess chances are if they're submitting a new unit to you, they wouldn't have known the old way anyway. So it's like, not that they have anything to compare it, but has there been any oh, this is really confusing or this is really difficult? Out of curiosity, and maybe there has been, because you never know.
No, any existing clients who were then bringing on a new property and it was going through the new system have all raved about how much simpler and how much cleaner the process is. I think the only time you'll ever get pushback, and this I would kind of say is universal across the board, is when you're dealing with a non-tech savvy client. Typically, they're on the older side. They're used to paper, those types of situations. But that's the nice thing, is the system is set up to where we can manually skip past these points if we basically end up there. So all in all, people like it. It's smoother. My team likes it. The clients like it. It just works better.
Nice. I think it's really, I really was interested to hear about some specific processes from you that you're using, because I think any property manager is going to recognize these processes very, very, and probably from all the property managers I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot of them, these are, owner onboarding, pain in the ass. Property onboarding, pain in the ass. Application, pain in the ass. And then the next one would be renewals, I guess. Right? The next in line of succession, which I guess we'll be tackling at some point soon, if not if we haven't already.
Don't forget work orders as well. There's always the key property management pain points, and most of the processes run pretty similar, if I'm being honest. And I think that kind of universal approach to kind of breaking it down to stages and then finding out where those kind of variable points are, it helps the team as far as, okay, well, yeah, this runs very similar to how this other process runs. But I think if I were to say one of the biggest kind of unexpected gains that I have seen since rolling out the system is that it's really opened up my team's eyes to problem solving, to solutions-based, creative solutions to problems.
Because they can have a system,
exactly,
because they can input.
Well, and it's very easy for them to identify bottlenecks, right? At this point in the process, we're noticing we're getting a lot of these questions. Oh, well, let's deliver this piece of information at this stage of the process rather than over here, and those questions go away. So it's kind of, I do really appreciate the way that it has opened their eyes and kind of turned them into the type of people who like to tinker, right? How can we take an existing process that works and make it just a little bit better?
And that's, that really is interesting to me, because my experience of property managers on the whole, and this is not a universal and it's certainly not a slur, but on the whole, most of them have been very you've either got a really anal process that's written out to the ridiculous, to the ridiculous point where it's like, I'm going to document my processes to the point of you've got to read War and Peace to do a property on board or something, or you get a system or company where they've been there, maybe they've been working there for a while, they've had the same staff for a while, so there's a lot of, Lauren knows how to do that. Lauren knows how to do that one, or Matthew. Yeah, Matthew. We just sent it to Matthew, and Matthew knows how to do it. Well, what fucking happens if Matthew dies?
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting because none of them ever. It's for those who have documented their processes if it's the War and Peace model, or even just mainly, it tends to be like Moses handing the tablet down on high, and that the team just are like, oh, okay, this is, this is how, okay, well, this is how I have to do it. And the fact that you've spurred your team to maybe be able to put their hand up and be like, this, we can fix this if we just sent this a week earlier.
You know what? You're absolutely right. I do appreciate that part of it. And, because the more they think that way, that's what's going to lead to improvement. But in a weird way, what I almost like the most about our system is that it takes away all of the different ways that they might used to have done something. And by that, I mean, there's always the opportunity in a manual process to go off script. And maybe there's a good reason for going off script, but oftentimes it's not a good reason for going off script. And anytime you do something differently, it's going to cause problems down the road. So that is the one thing that I love about Podio, is every single application runs in the exact same way. There's only a couple of different variable points. There's only a couple of different options that happen, and you get a nice consistent workflow across the board, and you almost eliminate the team's ability to go off script. Now, if they look at it and they identify a point where, hey, there's another variable, well, great. That's easily something we can basically put in there. But it helps me keep them running within a kind of narrow framework, which I think eliminates the possibility of a lot of errors.
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on there, and where I would assume that the Podio, the way that your system is now and the way Podio manages processes, you said something earlier where people would have to manually send emails, or they manually send up and tell people that the rental unit's no longer available. But the other thing I noticed is, for those people who maybe they used Process Street, and this isn't a dig at Process Street at all, but they'd outline their process, and they even potentially were in a place where they would duplicate that process for every unit, right? Oh, unit 302 is now going through this process. We're going to build this one, and this is the unit 302 version of this process. Mm-hmm. It still required a lot, even in Process Street, it required you to go through the list of all of the ones that were open to figure out where they all were and what to do next. Yeah. And to me, I always used to class that as passive workflow, because you're essentially having to go find your workflow and if you've got 400 units and 30 of them are up for rent, having passive workflow means you are literally having to go, right, 302's at this stage, okay, that means I've got to do this. Whereas with Podio and the way you've designed your processes, the processes get activated. They become active processes, and the system sort of shoves it in your face. We're here now.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And that is a great point, because, in property management, there is kind of the tendency to want to know where everything's at. But to be fair, someone in my maintenance department doesn't really care where everything's at. All they care about is what work orders they need to address today, what stage those work orders are in, and what they need to get done by the actual end of business. So I do agree with you in the sense that we've taken the tasks and we've kind of pushed them down to a level where anyone on my team can basically walk in and they can see exactly what they have to do that day. Every single thing on there. And so what they work on quite consistently is their task list. Sure, they might go to the actual rental applications app and see how many they have on a certain property from time to time. But by and large, the system tells them what they have to do. Their day is completely structured and I would say designed based on what the system is telling them to do. So oftentimes they're not having to manage processes. They're just managing their daily workload. And that, I think, is a much more efficient way to do it. It's clear expectations from management on down. Hey, this is exactly what you need to be working on today. They know what's expected, and it just flows cleaner and better.
And it's such a difference between, like, I will talk about active versus passive workflow until I die, I'm sure. Because I really believe where you have a process written down and you refer to it, you're always in the back foot having to find information. And when you have a process built in a way that it activates onto something and drives it, it doesn't suddenly say it doesn't mean you can't look at the big picture, or you can't, hey, let's look at everything that's coming up next month or whatever. You can still do that, but that ability to just not have to go, okay, I'm a property manager and I've got 150 of them in my portfolio I'm looking after, right? I know that this one was at this stage. I know. And then and everyone I saw, there was this like breaking point of around 350 to 400 units where the property managers would just lose their fucking minds, because they were just you had too many property managers, in which case you didn't making any money, or you had too few and your property managers were going, you need to give them a sedative or something. So
everything's on fire, right? I absolutely hear you there. And when I kind of talk about Podio and the way things work, I also love the fact that we make things easier by only giving them the information that they need to know. So say, for example, on a work order that basically comes in the system, before this work order would come in, someone would need to go and, okay, great, here's the tenant. So let's let them know, okay, great, we got your work order. Hey, here's the troubleshooting steps for this. Okay, wait, we need to talk to the owner on this one about a approval. So let's go ahead and find that owner's information, send it out over here. In Podio, when a work order comes into our system, I can see the property, the unit, the owner, the tenant. I can see the vendor that we've got assigned to it. I can see exactly what stage it's in. So now if I have a question, right, let's say there's a fire on my plate where an owner is called and they are pissed off about something and they want information and they want it now. Before, that conversation always ended the same way. Let me get with my maintenance team and I'll get back to you. Now, my team can simply go in there and they can tell them exactly where things are at. They can tell them exactly what the last update was. They can tell them what the status is, how things are changing, what the situation is. And so people on our owner relations team can communicate better information because they can visually see what's going on in the maintenance department or the leasing department or any other department and just provide good, clean information. So it's just one of the other things I love about it. If you can't tell, there's not much I don't like, I would say now compared to the way things were.
Excellent. Well, I thought it would be really interesting now that you guys are in the thick of it. And, obviously your system is one that's still being worked. Like we're still adding new things. We've got new elements coming in and awesome things and all that. But it also is being used in anger now. And that's, to me, that's the key, because then it becomes a less of a, well, we hope it will do, and more of a, well, this is what it's doing so far. And we're even just at the beginning of how much it can do even better.
You know what? And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that was one of the things I was going to mention. Is one of the other kind of what I would call unintended benefits of having my team start to problem solve is how quickly we can build solutions for problems. So say, for example, I live in a part of the US that is currently experiencing a significant drought. So this year, more so than other years in the past, dead yards have been causing us problems. Well, how do we want to handle that? It's not really an issue that my team has had to address on any large scale prior to this year. Well, we built a Podio app, we imported some data in there, and now we have workflows for how we're going to handle this new thing that came up. And we went from having no kind of specific structured process for this, because it would kind of come up randomly before, to now we have an entire app with a workflow with people who are basically responsible for it. And we built it in like 2 days. So it's just like once the team gets used to Podio and how things can work, it's very easy to add on and solve new problems that basically come up with Podio.
And did you guys build that all yourself, or was it a collaboration between us and you? Or did we do anything in it? We may not have done anything.
There's a couple of things that we have done entirely on our own, because the apps don't necessarily require any what I would call automation. We're not trying to trigger anything. We're not trying to send out a comms template or a task template. We're just trying to manage something, that we might have been managing on a spreadsheet before, but now we can put it in Podio. We can have the information that we want, and it just works well.
Nice. Well, That's fantastic. I think it's really, really interesting. As always, I will drop a link to the company. So if you are looking, if you've got a house to rent out or a flat apartment to rent out in Salt Lake City, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Salt Lake City. Then I will Wolfnest Property Management. I will pop the link in the blog and in the notes of the podcast. Justin, it's always a pleasure to see you. Always a pleasure to chat to you. And really interesting now that you're actually using it to see the results, even at the early stages where, there's still more to go. It will be phenomenal to see in a year just how much more this has developed and how much more this has changed.
Oh, you and I agree completely. I mean, we are just scratching the surface. My team has literally been working in Podio for about 3 months now. And where we were 3 months ago to where we are today has been a game changer for, let's call it lack of a better term.
For branding purposes, for contractually obliged branding purposes.
Exactly. But, I mean, we're excited for everything we're adding. And, where we'll be by the actual end of the year, I think is going to be light years beyond where we are now. So I'm excited. Thanks for all the help with it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Please subscribe, like, share, do all the things you're supposed to do. And thank you, Justin. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Supercharged with Jordan Samuel Fleming. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify for your weekly dive into how you can supercharge your business by making it powered by Podio. Be sure to check out our website, wearegamechangers.com, where you can learn more and arrange a 30-minute call with Jordan to help you understand how Podio supercharges you.